Pam Grier returns to Miami Vice in the only episode NBC refused to air. Too Much Too Late was directed by Richard Compton and was written by Jack Richardson from a story idea by John A. Connor. It's the fourth and final of the so-called lost episodes, although unlike the other three, this one wasn't dropped because the series had been cancelled and NBC had other shows to air in its valuable time slot. This one was dropped because NBC refused to air it. A woman named Yvonne begs for drugs from her dealer, Swain, even though she's broke and already owes him money. Swain beats her up and trashes her home to the sounds of Help Me Through the Night by series composer Tim Truman and R&B star Phil Perry. While this is happening, Yvonne's young daughter Lynette hides in her bedroom. Yvonne is played by film and television mainstay CCH Pounder, who you've seen in The Shield and NCIS New Orleans and ER and much, much more. Swain is played by John Toles-Bay, while young Lynette is played by Soul Food's Malinda Williams. As the violence escalates, Lynette picks up the phone and calls Valerie Gordon, the NYPD detective played by Pam Grier, who we've seen in the episodes Rites of Passage and Prodigal Son. Valerie then calls her sometimes lover Tubbs, who immediately heads to Yvonne's home. By the time he arrives, Swain has already fled, leaving Yvonne badly injured. In the hospital, Yvonne refuses to give Tubbs any information about Swain, even though Lynette pleads with her to let the police arrest him. Yvonne insists to her daughter that she needs Swain's drugs too much. Valerie jets off to Miami and greets Tubbs and Crockett at headquarters. Even though Valerie's obvious priority is helping Yvonne, who is a close childhood friend, there are obviously still sparks between Tubbs and Valerie. Valerie tries to convince Yvonne to go into rehab. Instead, Yvonne asks her for money, which Valerie angrily gives her over Lynette's protests. Yvonne uses Valerie's cash to repay Swain. She tries to buy more drugs, but he refuses to sell to her. She propositions him, and he turns her down but says he's willing to give her drugs if she lets him rape Lynette. She agrees, and Swain heads into Lynette's bedroom, and this is probably the point NBC's Standards and Practices Department reached before saying, yeah, we're not gonna air this. At headquarters, Switek places some bets with his bookie, then lies and tells Crockett he's been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings to deal with his addiction. Crockett seems pleased yet skeptical, probably because he knows Switek very well. Tubbs, meanwhile, is feeling good because he and Valerie have rekindled their romance. Crockett is once again pleased yet skeptical because he's seen firsthand how Tubbs and Valerie's romance always ends in tears. Tubbs gets an emergency call from Valerie. Yvonne has been stabbed to death, presumably by Swain, and Lynette has disappeared. An APB is put out for Lynette while Tubbs and Valerie look for Swain. They talk to Izzy, who is running a fabulous new scam, a 2-for-1 combination of beachfront tango lessons and financial advice. Izzy promises to ask around about Swain. Switek attends a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, but leaves halfway through to place a bet. His bookies try to repossess his car to cover his debts, but he hijacks the tow truck and drives off. They track him down and confront him at gunpoint and tell him that from here on out, they own him, and someday soon they're gonna call in a big favor. Valerie and Tubbs deepen their relationship. Tubbs tells Crockett he's planning to propose and then gets angry with his partner when Crockett suggests slowing things down. Valerie and Tubbs search for Lynette to Mixed Up Shook Up Girl by Meek DeVille and find her hiding in a park. Lynette bursts into tears and tells them Swain raped her. A police doctor wants to question Lynette, but Valerie sends her away, claiming Lynette is too traumatized to talk to anyone. Crockett grows suspicious at Valerie's passionate reaction. Tubbs proposes to Valerie, and she turns him down. While waiting for Izzy at a bar, Crockett expresses his concerns to Tubbs that Valerie's hiding something. Tubbs is enraged at the suggestion, but come on, Tubbs. Every single time we've seen Valerie on this series, she's been involved in something shady. The very first time we met her, she flat out murdered a pimp at the end of the episode. Doing shady things is one of Valerie's dominant character traits, along with being a gorgeous badass and setting off crazy romantic sparks with Tubbs. Angry at Crockett, Tubbs storms out of the bar, but runs into Izzy, who gives him the address of a crack house where they can find Swain. Crockett and Tubbs arrest Swain to You Gonna Get Yours by Public Enemy and put him in a police lineup. Lynette insists they've got the wrong guy, and he's released. Afterward, Crockett tells Tubbs point blank that something funny is going on between Valerie and Lynette, and Tubbs finally sees that he's right. Tubbs confronts Valerie, who's in a panic because after the failed lineup, Lynette stole her gun and ran off. Lynette stops by Swain's swanky pad with a grocery bag full of booze and tells him she wants to have more sex with him. Swain, who has an inflated sense of his own irresistibility, sees absolutely nothing suspicious about this. Lynette points Valerie's gun at him and tells him she killed her mother because Yvonne was unapologetic about letting Swain rape her daughter. Before Lynette can shoot Swain, Tubbs and Valerie burst in and get the gun away from her. Lynette is placed in child services, and Tubbs and Valerie have one final meeting where Valerie confesses that she's been covering for Lynette all along and was more than happy to to frame Swain for Yvonne's murder. Tubbs and Valerie realize it'll never work between them. Valerie returns to New York to surrender her badge, and Tubbs is left all alone, heartbroken and bitter. It's not hard to see why NBC put its foot down and refused to air this. Malinda Williams had just turned 14 when this episode aired. She looks like and is a child, and that's part of what makes this episode so unsettling. We see a mother voluntarily handing over her child to be raped by a violent adult male, with no room for misinterpretation, and that's a line Miami Vice hadn't crossed before. I'm all for television that crosses lines and pushes established boundaries of taste and decorum, and certainly those boundaries are fluid. 30 years later, I don't think NBC would blink an eye before airing an episode like this one. But in this case, I'm torn on whether it was worth crossing that line. I think this is a decent episode with good performances, but it's not great, and if you're going to cross lines, it's best to make sure every other element is so strong that no one can accuse you of adding sensationalistic content because you don't have much else to offer. And that's the whole problem with this episode. Apart from those sensationalistic elements, this episode retreads ground that was already covered in Season 1's Rites of Passage. Valerie comes to Miami to save a young girl who's very close to her from a dangerous situation. Both episodes center around drug addiction and sexual exploitation of young girls, and both episodes involve Tubbs falling in love with Valerie only to have his heart broken when Valerie does something shady. The similarities are probably deliberate. Over the last few episodes, Miami Vice has been making a lot of callbacks to its early days, which I've enjoyed. But this episode gives me a lingering sense of deja vu. However, it's great to see Pam Grier again, and she and Tubbs are as unbearably sexy together as always, so I'm going to give this 3 flamingos. Next time, Crockett and Tubbs reach the end of their journey, and we will say farewell to Miami Vice. I hope you'll join me here one last time, and until then, please enjoy your week.